Hello and welcome to the first Sunday Politics of 2025. The problems in our health service have dominated the start of the year, but how quickly can they be dealt with? We'll ask a leading surgeon how he thinks the challenges should be tackled, and we'll hear the thoughts of a former health union leader turned politician. The First Minister said 2025 would be a year of delivery from the executive. With so many issues mounting, where should she start? And here with her thoughts on that and more, the Belfast Telegraph's political editor, Suzanne Breen. Delays getting patients into emergency departments are leading to increased deaths. That was the stark warning from the medical director of the ambulance service here, and it came after a challenging fortnight for EDs. In a moment, we'll hear from Professor Mark Taylor and the Sinn Féin MP Pat Cullen. But first, let's look back at some of the problems of the past week.
This place has went completely to the dogs. People are getting treated. God knows what's wrong with them. They're sick. They're like animals.
We're really struggling to look after people. The environment is absolutely intolerable, of which we're looking after the elderly, the vulnerable and it is absolutely undignified.
Last night in particular we had 500 patients who had delayed discharges, so that means those patients who are currently fit to be home but unfortunately aren't home are in the hospital environment, and as a consequence there's no beds for our patients in the emergency department to move to.
She's freezing, she's absolutely freezing in there. They keep turning the heating on to try and help her. They've given her morphine there to try and help with the pain because she's in so much pain, but it's just frustrating.
My fear is that my son will not make it. That's my fear.
Just some of the stories making the news this past week. I'm joined now by the consultant surgeon, Professor Mark Taylor, who speaks for NICON, that's the Northern Ireland Confederation for Health and Social Care, and by the Sinn Féin MP Pat Cullen, who was, of course, until last year, the Chief Executive and General Secretary of the Royal College of Nursing across the UK. So welcome to both of you. Good to see you. Mark Taylor, let me ask you first of all, I gather you can bring us right up to date with the numbers as of last night.
Yes, Mark, as of last evening, things were slightly better than the previous weekend. There were still 640 people in our emergency departments. We had over 200 of them waiting more than 12 hours, and there were 284 decisions to admit. But the important point, Mark, is that at 10 o'clock yesterday morning, throughout our hospital infrastructure, we had 532 people who were medically fit for discharge but can't be discharged out to the community.
They are stuck in the system, and we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail in a moment or two, because that seems to be a major part of the problem here. I just want to ask you briefly what you make of that warning that I mentioned from the head of the ambulance service here, Dr. Nigel Ruddle, that basically patients, getting patients into emergency departments, the delays in that happening are actually causing people to lose their lives.
Absolutely, Mark. Triage is important. When someone's acutely unwell, the sooner you get that individual to the level of care that that individual needs, the better for their outcome. And when you have a situation where, because of this immense pressure, and remember this immense pressure has been all year round, but we've had the perfect storm in the last couple of weeks, and that is with the flu. When you have a system that is under so much pressure, you cannot get ambulances decanting those very vulnerable patients into the emergency department. Those ambulances are trapped at the emergency departments. And therefore, when the call comes through for the person with trauma or an acute heart attack or an acute stroke, there are delays, and those delays have consequences. And that is why this is such a serious situation.
Yeah, that's another major part of the problem, and we saw that reflected in some of the clips we saw from the news of the past week as well. Pat Cullen, as an elected politician now and a former health professional, how concerned are you about what's been happening over the past couple of weeks in health and social care?
Of course, it's concerning for our patients. That's the first thing, but also for the staff that's trying to find their way through a system that is in crisis maybe all year round for them. And if you think of the NHS, it's almost been a victim of its own success in many respects. Medical advancements and the medical expertise that we have now, people are living longer, and the NHS hasn't been reformed in the way it should have been to be able to deal with the advancements that we've got and the number of people that are coming through. So it is very, very concerning, there's no doubt about that. And we do need to see the transformation happen that we see within the blueprint of Bingo, and people like Professor Taylor and others that were part of that group that set out that blueprint for us. And that's something that does need to happen very, very quickly once we get through this next few weeks, and we want to see that happen.
Yeah, transformation is absolutely key. I'll come on to that in a bit more detail in a moment. I want to talk about last week's emergency meeting of the Health Committee at Stormont. Mark, you watched it very carefully. I watched it, went on for a few hours. It heard from the Health Minister, Mike Nesbitt, and some officials. And what jumped out at our team watching proceedings was that the trusts seem to have different approaches to the hospital pathway. I mean, essentially, it seems some of those trusts focus on the front door, if you want, through the emergency departments. Some of them focus on the back door, which is getting people back home again, out into the community. Is that the way you see it?
Well, I think, first of all, if we look back at one of the initiatives several years ago was called No More Silos. And No More Silos was actually about this very thing, Mark. How do we improve flow through a system? And at that stage, there were various pilot studies. So each trust were doing different components of that No More Silos document. And one of the comments that NHS Confed is saying at the minute is use the best of the NHS for the rest of the NHS. And so all of these projects, whether it be the hospital at home in the Southern Trust, whether it be the ambulatory care in the Northern Trust, whether it be some of the advances in Belfast around social care packages, discharge out of hospital, all of these are an essential ingredient. And actually what the trusts have been doing in the absence of funding, they've been trying to do this anyway. They've been trying to scale up the best practice, whether that be keeping frail elderly people at home or trying to enhance discharge on the other side.
I think what people will find difficult to understand is why. I think No More Silos was October 2020. This is January 2025, and we still clearly have silos in health and social care, so we haven't cracked that nut at this stage. Why is it not possible across Northern Ireland? It's not a huge place. We don't have a massive population compared to elsewhere in these islands. Why do we have different systems operating in different places? Why can we not have a joined-up approach where people focus on the best policies for the front door and the best policies for the back door? You can have one, you can have the other, but it seems you can't, for whatever reason, have both. Certainly not at the level that we need to deal with the figures that you've just quoted for us.
Well, I think the first thing is that the trusts are covering different landscapes, different characteristics. So we have some trusts who have a much more rural population, and we have other trusts that are very much centred in large populated urban society. But what I would suggest, Mark, and again, I've been involved with Bingo for 10 years now, the silos that we once had are far less now than they were then. And I can think back to a time when one trust wouldn't do a new innovation because it was done by another trust first. Those days have gone, but this is really complex because for every time we put attention towards pre-hospital, we still then are dealing with the worst waiting lists in the UK. Yeah. We're still then dealing with a workforce that feels demoralised or suffering for moral justice. And could I just thank all our staff at this present time, because they go in every day to try and do the very best they can.
Yeah, Professor Taylor makes a good point. We are doing many things better now than we were doing 4 or 5 years ago, and we're trying to tackle some of the big issues that were difficult for health and social care in the past. Nobody would dispute that. The problem is the situation now with the winter flu crisis is worse than it has been in the past. The waiting lists are bigger than they have been, and the difficulty actually getting people admitted to hospital and getting people who are ready to go home is worse now than it was 12, 24 months ago. It
is. And just back to what you were saying about some places doing something at the front door, others doing something at the back door. And I think what that is symptomatic of, in the north, we have been very good at piloting the best of care. And piloting means that non-recurrent monies have been put into those areas. The money hasn't been forthcoming then to mainstream those services, and inevitably what we do, we find they either teeter out or they're not rolled out, as Mark has said, right across the system. And we need to stop piloting what we know really works, because clinicians are telling us that it works. We know that acute care at home works very well, where we bring the hospital to the patient's home, preventing those people coming into the hospitals and sitting, as we see, in emergency departments. We know that we need to do more within social care, but all of that requires money, and we've had 14 years of us having austerity within the north. The Tory government starved this place of funding, and whilst we see that the finance minister has put 50% of the block grant towards health, it's still, the block grant overall is not fit for purpose, and we need to see the money coming into Northern Ireland. We also need to understand that people here in the north pay their taxes, they pay their national insurance. So it's not that we're looking for handouts, we're looking for the people here to be treated the same as the people in London or in anywhere else throughout Britain.
Well, because you know that economists who would say that we actually do very well out of that settlement. It's not a conversation we're going to have at this point. But in the past, when you were working as a health professional, you said money was absolutely key. It was key to pay more money to nurses, key to pay more money to doctors, key to get as much investment into health and social care as possible. And now your colleague, the Finance Minister, Kiva Archibald, says that Mike Nesbitt has got as much as he can get. It's not as much as he wants, it's not as much as he says he needs, but she has said within the envelope of money that she has, he has got what he needs to do, what he needs to do. Are you saying that that is right or that that is wrong? Is more money necessary to solve this problem, or does Mike Nesbitt have to deal with what he's got and find a way of making that more effective? Yes,
I think what Kiva Archibald, the Finance Minister, is saying, that with the overall monies that we've got available here in the north, she has already allocated over 50% of that to health. But we've also to look at the other areas. We have to look at health, education. We need to look at the economy. We need to look at housing. With all of those other areas, and those are all determinants that impact on people's health as well.
But do you think Mike Nesbitt can deliver the kind of health and social care service that we clearly need in Northern Ireland with the resources he has available to him, as delivered by your colleague Kiva Archibald? Can he do that?
Well, he can do what he can do with the money, and that's the bottom line. We are saying very loud and clear that overall the money is insufficient within the north to actually...
And that's a separate argument, because we're not going to solve that around this table.
It's one of the same argument, Mark, because we do not have the money in the first place to allocate further money to the health budget. OK, so we are where we are in terms of the money that is available, and that brings us to the issue of transformation. I'm not saying that that's not a conversation that needs to take place, but it's not one we've got time to get into now in great detail, and we've discussed it with other ministers in the past. In terms of where we go from here and how we try to do better with the resources currently available to us, you were part of the Bangor team, you've talked about transformation. I don't know how many conversations you and I have had about the need for transformation, and still we keep talking about it. I know there's a bit of it happening, but it's always effectively a conversation in the future tense rather than the present tense. Why can we not get on with it and do what needs to be done?
Well, first of all, it's very complex. Secondly, I agree completely with Pat around pilots and non-recurrent funding, and also the fact that this is the entire executive's problem, not just a Minister of Health's problem. The determinants of health traverse all departments. It's difficult in the rest of the United Kingdom and in Ireland as it is here. I think the difficulty, and we have to call it for what it is, the stop-start government did not help us, because if you think of Michelle O'Neill's delivering together 2026 10-year plan, we're in 2025, and unfortunately we have an awful lot of that delivering together plan still to do, and I suspect that the political instability has to have been part of that situation. And the difficulty here, Mark, is we can't speak out of both sides of our mouth, and what I mean by that is we can't keep having all systems in place in every part of our infrastructure in one hand, but at the same hand talk about moving money into the community and into primary care and into prevention and into social care. And at the same time, when it comes to our parish, we have these difficulties in trying to bring about the necessary change to the way we do business in the hospitals. And part of the dilemma at the present time is public anxiety.
OK, we're nearly out of time. Just finally, Pat Cullen, this is the first opportunity we've had to talk to you in the programme since you won your seat in last July's general election. Has the move into politics for you been all that you hoped it would be? Are you glad you made that transition?
Yes, I am, because when I was working as a nurse, and still I'm a registered nurse, and working as a trade unionist, it's about getting the best for public services and for the people, and standing up for people and ensuring that they've got a voice, and that's what politics is about, and that's what I want to continue to do for the fantastic people that I represent in Fermanagh and South Tyrone. OK,
we're out of time. We've got to leave it there. Thank you both very much indeed for coming in to join us today. Let's just get some analysis of all of that from the Belfast Telegraph's Suzanne Breen, who's been following the story, obviously, and listening to today's conversation. Just starting with that emergency session of the Health Committee during the week, did that, in your view, move things forward in any significant way?
I don't think it did. I believe that there is a desire on behalf of the other parties not to attack Mike Nesbitt too ferociously. They know that the sight to the public of politicians squabbling over health is unseemly, so they reined it back in a bit. But there is a lot of criticism privately about the minister. One MLA said to me after the emergency meeting that, Northern Ireland's emergency department faced really such a grave crisis, and all Mike Nesbitt did was throw scraps. That something like extending the vaccination programme to the over 50s for the flu vaccine really wasn't enough. They need to see him start to get on top of this whole issue of social care packages, which is causing the greatest problem, the lack of them in our ED departments, which is leading to bed blocking, which is a very, very unfortunate term, bed blocking. People think, that patients and their families are doing something really wrong when they're not. It's not their fault that there aren't packages that enable the medically fit elderly to leave hospital. Yeah,
it's absolutely not their fault, but it's clearly a major part of the problem, as we identified in that previous conversation. People might be listening to this conversation thinking about where we are at the start of a new year and saying, well, look, the Executive's been back now for 12 months. Are things getting better, or are things just the same as they always were and are likely to be?
They're not getting better. In fact, the winter crisis in emergency departments is worse this year. And if we look at some of the stats, in the worst year of the Troubles in 1972, 470 people died. 472 men, women and children were killed. The last statistics that I have seen show that there were 3 times that number of people died because of delays in our emergency departments. 1,400 people died. More people, far more people than the loss of life in the worst year of the Troubles. That is completely unacceptable. And those figures for deaths due to delays in emergency department, they're from 2 years ago. So God knows what the current up-to-date figures would be for an unnecessary loss of life. So our politicians really need to get on top of this. It is the most urgent matter facing politicians at Stormont. It is not just Mike Nesbitt's responsibility. It is all their responsibilities to offer us better.
OK. A lot of figures in the programme today, not least the up-to-date figures that we got from Mark Taylor at the start of the programme. Suzanne, for now, thanks very much indeed. We'll talk to you again a little bit later in the programme. But we're going to stay on the subject of executive delivery, because a new report from Ulster University has argued there needs to be a greater focus on transformation in order to use resources more efficiently. The report's co-author is Professor Stephen Farry, who joins me now. Welcome to the programme. Good to see you again. It's interesting that you are writing this report about transformation. We've just had a conversation on the programme. featuring somebody who's done I suppose the opposite of what you've done, gone from private life to become a politician.
Sure.
You've gone from being a politician to moving into private life and academia. And transformation dominated an element of that conversation, and here we are talking about it again. It's right at the centre of the political debate.
Absolutely, and this is where it has to be. I mean, transformation must be core to what the executive is doing over the coming years. This is about greater efficiency and, perhaps more importantly, better outcomes for people. And our current situation with our public finances, they're not sustainable. On the surface, there's a 1.5 billion bar consequential coming for the executive next year. But if you look at this year, for example, even with very significant bar consequential, there's still an overspend that has to be addressed before the end of the financial year. There's pressures coming through in terms of the employer's national insurance, there's public pay pressures in the system, other inescapables. And bear in mind that in England, that money is arising from additional investment in health and education and other areas, and we may struggle to match that investment, and the performance gap may in fact widen. So we need to have this conversation about how we do things differently in Northern Ireland. And of course there's a tension mark, and we heard it there in the first discussion around the immediacy of the short-term crisis, which obviously people want to address, versus the long-term changes to do things better.
So what does that actually mean? What does transformation look like in your view for health, for education, for infrastructure, in real terms that people watching this programme can understand? Can you explain what you're talking about?
Well, for transformation, I mean, it can cover many different aspects. One example would be about prevention, early intervention, doing things at an earlier stage, trying to manage the demand going through the system. So in terms of health, investment in public health would be a very clear example in that regard. But even taking a step further back, what we do in terms of the employment, people having a job are less likely to have ill health, investing in early years education, people who have education, those opportunities, are less likely to experience health problems during their lifespan. That's the issue around health inequalities. That's one example. The use of technology, artificial intelligence at the moment is very much on the agenda. How the executive can be deploying that, I don't think Northern Ireland's fully deploying it to the same extent that some other jurisdictions are. We don't have a strategy, for example, in Northern Ireland. Our colleagues in Scotland and Wales do. So that's a clear differentiation. And obviously, in terms of health, the issue about reconfiguration of the services is also very live.
And you know that members of the public hear reconfiguration, they hear transformation, and they think cuts. You know how politicians think because you spent an awful lot of time with politicians talking to them, and they're not great, let's be absolutely honest, and this is not exclusive to Northern Ireland, they're not great necessarily at taking difficult decisions that members of the public might not fully understand, might not fully care about, and think it equals a loss of services. I mean, what you do not want is to have to be selling less for more, less in terms of the service available for more public money. And that's what an awful lot of people see whenever they witness the transformation debate going on. How do you persuade them that that's not the case?
Yeah, and without doubt, Mark, this is a tension. It's not just around health issues, it's around climate, for example, where we do know, when we're seeing the fires in LA at present, that we have to do things differently in terms of climate. But people are seeing climate changes as a threat to their standard of living.
And you talk about green budgeting. I mean, presumably that is part of your...
That's part of it as well, factoring in that green analysis in terms of the allocation of resources. But people are very much fixated on the short term, and there is a challenge in terms of transformation, particularly with a lot of the preventative spend, that the results won't be seen for several years down the line. So it is a leap of faith, but the current climate at the moment is difficult for making those decisions. But I would counter that by saying that the public finances suggest that we have nowhere else to go. I mean, for example, we heard that discussion there about the fiscal floor, and that's very important to getting our public finances right. But even if we move from the current figure of 124 to the upper limit of 127, that's only going to produce an extra couple of £100 million per year. All of that's very, very helpful.
Which won't solve all of our problems.
No. And if you bear in mind that we're going to lose 520 million of stabilisation funding in 26-27, which is part of the financial package, then we immediately see a problem. That's a gap to be filled in that respect. So transformation has to do that.
OK, just quickly, it's been reported on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph today that the Chancellor's to lead a major new drive to tackle so-called waste and inefficiency across the public sector. I mean, effectively, she wants to clamp down on unnecessary spending. Does that need to be part of the Executive's approach as well?
Well, they do need to challenge what they're doing. Often, whenever we do budgets, it's about incremental changes. So there will be allocations to departments, and they will either allocate it to existing areas and do more, or sometimes have to do less. You can't do much more radical thinking and challenge every budget line. It is a much more long-term commitment. It's time-consuming, but it's what's called zero-based budgeting. But you would find that may well produce some results. The danger is that sometimes these things can come across as gimmicks rather than being something that's actually genuinely looking deeply at the issues. Just
finally and briefly, and I need to make this point because I can imagine some people will expect me to, and that is simply that your critics may say all of this sounds a bit like something we might read in an Alliance Party manifesto.
I think this is common sense. I mean, we are apolitical. I'm no longer a member of the Alliance Party. What we're doing is for the good of Northern Ireland and beyond. This is about sound public policy, and we need to develop further, and as other colleagues doing this, the public policy debates in Northern Ireland, and through our think tank and others, it's important that we have that mature discussion around evidence-based policy making.
OK, good to hear your thoughts. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme. Final thought from Suzanne, who's been listening to all of that. I mean, there's a lot to get our teeth into in that, isn't there?
There is indeed, and I think just the average person sitting at home will be quite disappointed at our executive almost 1 year on from its formation. It's been very strong on symbolism. So we have camogie playing Irish speaking by the DUP at times. And we have Michelle O'Neill standing for God Save the King going to a Northern Ireland match. But in terms of really concrete achievements that will change people's lives, there have been very few of such things. In fact, the only thing that I can think of at the moment would probably be the Education Minister, Paul Givan, delivering the childcare subsidy for parents, which is actually putting money in people's pockets at the end of the month. I think that this executive, really, there are too many ministers that just don't want to drop the ball. They're not really seeking to make radical transformation. I don't get the feel that this is a high energy executive and one that is working collectively. We're still doing the same old thing, ministers just working on their own individual department.
What is interesting, though, is that when Michelle O'Neill says 2025 is going to be the year of delivery, the executive's been up and running for 12 months now, but we've got 2.5 years almost without a scheduled election, and maybe that gives the politicians the space to take some difficult decisions that would be very, very awkward for them if they were immediately facing the electorate.
Well, they really, really have to, because public services are just getting worse and worse by the month and by the year. And it was in 2016 that Michelle O'Neill stood up as Health Minister herself and announced the Bengoa report. And she said the health service was at breaking point. 9 years on, how much more worse are those problems facing our health system? And we have had enough talk, we've had enough reports that are gathering dust on shelves. Northern Ireland needs action, because our citizens are second-class citizens, not because of the Irish Sea border or anything like that, but because of our crumbling public services that aren't delivering for us.
We've got 10 seconds here, but potential change at the executive table with Conor Murphy running for a seat in the Seanad.
Yeah, look, there's been a lot of speculation about why he's going. Is he going to kind of somehow take charge of Sinn Féin behind the scenes down south? Or are people unhappy with him at Stormont? I don't think that's the case. I think this is a purely personal decision by Conor Murphy on health reasons. OK. Interesting to hear your thoughts. Suzanne, thank you very much. As ever, that is all we've got time for this week. A fresh episode of Red Lines will drop on Wednesday afternoon on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts, so do look out for that. And The View returns to BBC One and iPlayer this Thursday night at the usual time of 10:40. Until then, from everyone on the team, thanks for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.